Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. To combat inflation, the Alberta government announces more financial help for seniors, families, and those with disability issues. A family spokesperson spoke out following the sentencing of an Alberta man who received life in prison after killing 2 Métis hunters. And the head coach of the Lethbridge Hurricanes, Brent Kissio, who was an assistant at the World Juniors, returned home proudly displaying his gold medal.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Alberta government announced more financial help for families, seniors, and disabled Albertans. The province's $100 affordability payments will be given out this month. Officials say the money should help provide relief to offset inflationary pressures. They say beginning January 18th, seniors 65 and older who are not receiving the Alberta Seniors Benefit and eligible parents with kids under 18 can apply for a total of $600 in monthly payments. Officials say the funding will also help those who are most vulnerable.
That means if you receive AISH, PDD services, the Alberta Seniors Benefit, or income support, you don't need to sign up or fill out any extra paperwork. You should receive your first payment later this month. And don't worry, these targeted affordability payments will be considered exempt income, meaning they won't affect any other benefit you are already receiving. We know that seniors and Albertans living with disabilities need help, and we are proud to provide support that is timely and accessible.
The Lethbridge Fire and EMS departments say they are frustrated with the province's EMS dispatch system. Over the week, the department took to Twitter to express some of that frustration, saying the model is broken and there were situations where no physical ambulance was able to respond. Lethbridge Fire Chief Greg Adair says AHS released a new program last year, which will hopefully take the pressure off of emergency services.
Non-ambulance transfer program. It's the NAT program. And what that will do is that will free up some of the ambulance and paramedics and those resources so they don't have to do return transfers of patients who do not require medical assistance. All they require is an actual resource to drive them from either the hospital back to their healthcare facility, hospital to appointment. So this is a really good initiative because that will help take that pressure off the EMS or help relieve that pressure within the EMS system so that more ambulances are available.
The province's EMS dispatch was centralized to save taxpayers around $6 million annually. Well, the warming centre at Streets Alive has been suspended. Both Streets Alive and the City of Lethbridge said a lot of it had to do with loitering and our warmer Chinook temperatures. Officials say a new location is being sought for when the mercury plummets once again.
The need is definitely there for a warming center. We saw that in December when our wind chill, hit like minus 47 and it was really, really cold. It was a definite need. What we saw during the last couple weeks when the temperature has been much more mild is that we had more of a situation on the outside of the building than utilizing the inside of the building effectively. So right now, with the continued warm temperatures, in conversations with some of our neighbors, in conversations with the city, and some of the concerns about the exterior of the building when it was those warm temperatures, we decided to suspend the warming center for the time being and see if we can find a better location for the individuals that are accessing this service on those days that it gets really cold.
Now, LEPCO says Streets Alive is currently working with the City of Lethbridge to have a new warming centre location in place within the next couple of weeks. The final numbers are in for the Christmas Check Stop campaign put on by the Lethbridge Police Service. 7 impaired drivers were removed from the road during the campaign. Now, during the month of December, a total of 1,300 motorists went through the check stop during the very busy Christmas holiday season. 1 impaired driver was criminally charged, 6 immediate roadside sanction fails were issued, and there were 3 graduated driver's license suspensions. Police say there were also 4 warnings dished out, and tickets were issued to 2 drivers who were caught with suspended licenses. An Alberta man was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 13 years in the killing of 2 Métis hunters in 2020. A family spokesperson chatted with the media following the sentencing.
All the days since that day have been really tough for this family and for the community, and no amount of justice will ever ease their pain or bring the boys back. We just want to say thank you to all the supporters that have been out there, that have been praying, that have been sending messages, that have come to court on this really cold day and been outside waiting, to the media who have followed this trial and who've reached out and also supported this, to the Crown as well. They just want to, on behalf of the families, I just want to say thank you.
You know, it's nice that we've been enjoying above zero temperatures for a number of days now in southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, those warmer temperatures should continue for the most of the week, but prior to that, we could potentially see some flurries developing tonight.
Yeah, well, the flurries might be coming this evening, Hal, but they should be gone by tomorrow morning. What won't be gone, though, are those nice warm temperatures. We still have plenty of those left in the forecast for this week. Take a look at tomorrow, for example, 6 degrees the high, lots of sunshine. We're going to be having a 50K wind, that nice Chinook from the west there. Overnight this evening, -2 with that 60% chance of flurries. And then that should be it for the flurries for the rest of the week. I'll be back later in the show to give you that 7-day forecast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. A Team Canada assistant coach has returned to Lethbridge after winning gold at the World Junior Hockey Championship. Brent Kissio, who's also the head coach of the Lethbridge Hurricanes, says it feels great to have been brought back some of the hardware. He says it was a real honor to have been part of the winning team. Canada beat Czechia 3-2 in overtime to claim the title.
It's just an honor. You know, it's an honor to coach for your country, and there's a lot of weight there to make sure you do things right and you're prepared and have the players in the right spots and ready to go. But it's an absolute honor and a privilege to coach for Canada, and to win gold and bring it home for your country is always special. Our players were exceptional players, and we had some talent up there up front, obviously, and I thought our goaltender did a great job managed playing net, and all through the lineup, just a lot of team buy-in and a lot of great players doing some special things.
Congratulations again. By the way, Canada's now won 20 gold medals at the World Junior Hockey Championships since 1977. A refugee bus pass support program in our city was extended for an additional 2 months. In July of last year, Lethbridge City Council approved $90,000 in funding for Lethbridge Transit to provide a free 6-month bus pass to all new refugees arriving here in our city. In September, Council allocated $15,000 from the contingencies fund to continue with the program. Staff from the city say they'll use up the remaining money until the end of February.
We had several bus passes from both sections that were unallocated. So that ended up allowing us to have about $4,000. And in the December uptake on the passes was actually less than we were projecting. So that actually allowed us to have some additional funding that we believe will get us through the 2 months until the new policy can be adopted.
It's great that council recognized this gap in the community, and it's really doing a lot of good. And we're really seeing a huge positive impact on this.
A transit support pass program policy will be presented to the Governance Standing Policy Committee meeting on February 23rd for ongoing operations of the program. You know, if you're looking for the most diverse places in the city, or one of, you might want to try Lethbridge College. Over 40 countries are represented among Lethbridge College students. Around 175 of them are currently enrolled in the English Language Centre, with a few dozen still on the wait lists. It appears as though the number keeps rising since the program first began more than 50 years ago. The college recently passed a rigorous accreditation process with the Government of Canada for the 4th time in 12 years.
Earlier on in, say, the 90s, there were a lot of pop-up schools everywhere that were unregulated and offering kind of classes to people with unqualified teachers. Basically, anybody who could speak English could teach. And it's a science. I mean, we have to have degrees specifically in teaching English as a second language to understand the linguistics of it, of language acquisition. And so I think that accreditation came about is through the Government of Canada to ensure that people have trained professionals and that the government of Canada is doing what they say they're going to do when people come to Canada to study English. So now, in order to offer English language classes to international students in Canada, you must be accredited by Languages Canada.
The countries most represented by students at the college include Ukraine, Syria, Mexico, and Somalia. Students from Afghanistan, El Salvador, Sudan, and Brazil are also attending Lethbridge College. Lethbridge County is looking for some public feedback on our larger furry friends. According to officials with the county, they're asking the public who live in hamlets in the area if they should be allowed to have certain livestock or fowl within hamlet boundaries. Lethbridge County Reeve Tory Campbell says he's hoping for good public feedback on the issue.
I think there is and there has been some interest from residents to be able to have livestock, as hamlets are a kind of that soft spot between urban and rural. So I think it's something that the council is eager to hear some feedback on and see where we go from here. We're talking about livestock. So when we talk about that, we're talking about horses, sheep, goats, cattle, chickens, not cats and dogs. We're thinking of larger livestock here.
Council has passed first reading of an amended bylaw that would allow up to 5 animal units in hamlets, depending on the size of the property. A bylaw must pass 3 readings to take effect. Dinosaurs may be extinct, but their popularity has continued to grow. A traveling exhibit called Jurassic Quest is coming to Lethbridge in just a few short months. The company brings in life-size animatronic dinosaurs. You can expect to see the infamous Tyrannosaurus Rex, Brontosaurus, and a 50-foot-long Megalodon, just to name a few. Staff from Jurassic Quest showcase the difference between fossilized teeth coming from a regular shark and teeth coming from a prehistoric shark.
But you can see that it's darker in the middle and then it has coloring on the side. Whereas this tooth actually is gray all over. Now, the reason for the difference in that color is actually because of the process of fossilization. Whenever a bone is in the ground, the actual structure of the bone will break down and allow for gaps for minerals to flow in and solidify it as a fossil. But when there are different minerals in the ground, it can actually change the color of fossils. I know, it's so cool, right?
It is. You learn something new every day. Jurassic Quest will be at the Lethbridge District Exhibition Grounds from April 14th through the 16th. Canada's officially buying dozens of F-35 fighter jets to replace its aging fleet of CF-18s. The Harper Conservative government first committed to buying F-35s back in 2010 before concerns about the stealth fighters' costs and capabilities forced the government back to the drawing board. The first 4 planes are set to be delivered to an American site in 2026 for training purposes, with the rest arriving in phases. Grieving friends and relatives of victims killed during the downing of Flight PS 752 called for justice and accountability from the Iranian regime. Canadians from coast to coast marked 3 years since the country's military shot the plane down. At a ceremony in Toronto, families spoke out condemning the Islamic Republic's human rights record. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says further sanctions against Iran are needed.
It is important, and we support imposing sanctions, but we must enforce those sanctions. We must ensure that everyone on that list is actually punished. It is good to call out the IRGC as an evil terrorist organization, but it is appalling that today, 3 years after this organization murdered 85 of our own people, it is perfectly legal in Canada for this organization to operate. We must ban the IRGC as a terrorist organization now.
Brazilian authorities have arrested protesters and launched an investigation after a huge number of supporters of ex-President Bolsonaro stormed Congress, the Supreme Court, and the presidential palace in Brasilia. Protesters then allegedly trashed the nation's highest seats of power. Brazil's security minister says close to 1,500 arrests were made over the weekend. Newly inaugurated President Luiz da Silva was not on site when the invasion occurred, but has since flown back from visiting flood victims in Sao Paulo. U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy ushered in a new GOP majority. McCarthy was elected House Speaker on a historic 15th ballot on Saturday, overcoming holdouts and floor tensions following a chaotic week.
I never thought we'd get up here. You know, my father always told me, It's not how you start, it's how you finish. And now we need to finish strong for the American people. And now, the hard work begins. What we do here today, next week, next month, next year, will set the tone for everything that follows.
The cleanup continues after a huge storm along the central California coastline created massive flooding. Many residents removed mud and debris from both homes and businesses. The storm surge also destroyed a historic 100-year-old wooden pier.
The storm was raging, and we actually witnessed the pier go down. And it was not only a sight to see, but to hear it, to hear the pylons wrapping against each other. And the destructive force of the water was just incredible. And now to come the day after and to see it looks like a war zone here with debris everywhere and trees and logs and water everywhere. And it's something we've never seen before.
Well, we may see more moisture here in southwestern Alberta, but not in the form of rain. Instead, more of the white stuff. It should then warm up once again. A full look at the weather picture is on deck. You know, when folks first move to Lethbridge, I tell them it might be a good idea to dress in layers during the colder winter months. Because when a Chinook brings those warmer temperatures, you can just peel off a layer. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, tonight, however, you might want to add a layer or two.
Well, yeah, that might not be a bad idea, Hal, especially because we are looking at that 60% chance of flurries overnight and late this evening. We are also seeing that -2 overnight low, but it's going to feel more like -9 with the wind chill as we are expecting a 50-kilometer-per-hour wind. Into tomorrow, Tuesday, sunshine, 6 degrees, also a 50 wind. Into Wednesday, lots of sunshine, 3 degrees the high, then the temperature shooting back up to 7 degrees for Thursday, all the way up to 11 for Friday. I'm loving those double digits there with partly cloudy skies. And then as we look back into the weekend there, we're seeing a temperature of 6 for Saturday, and then it's going to drop down to -1 for Sunday. So I say we enjoy these lovely plus temperatures as long as we got them. Average high for this time of year, -2, average low, -14. 13 was our high temperature on this day back in 1943, and it was a freezing -36 back in 1949. 8:27, that's when the sun rose this morning. Sun is set this evening at 4:50 p.m. Look at that, the days are getting longer. 8 minutes and 27 minutes of daylight. As we look to the west coast tomorrow, Victoria, high of 9 degrees, seeing partly cloudy skies, periods of rainfall in Vancouver tomorrow, high of 10, -7 the high in Edmonton tomorrow with a 30% chance of flurries, and in Calgary, seeing a high of 3 degrees with partly cloudy skies. Of course, going to be experiencing a bit of wind chill there, making that 3 feel a little bit colder, more like in the minuses. -10, the high for Saskatoon tomorrow, looking at periods of snow there. Regina seeing -8 as well with fog dissipating in the morning. -7, the high in Winnipeg tomorrow with partly cloudy skies. As we look to the central part of the country, things are fairly mild over here as well. 0 the high in Toronto with overcast. Mainly cloudy skies tomorrow in Ottawa, -7 the high there, and -5 the high in sunny Montreal. As we look to Atlantic Canada, we're seeing quite a bit of snowfall. We're seeing snow in Fredericton, -3 the high. Halifax also seeing periods of snow, -1. Heavier snowfall, though, in Charlottetown, up to 5 centimeters, -2 the high, and a winter storm warning in effect for St. John's, Newfoundland, as they could be seeing 15 to 25 centimeters of snowfall tomorrow, and heavy blowing winds as well, up to 80 winds there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau flew to Mexico City to meet with U.S. President Joe Biden and Mexico's Andrés Obrador. It's part of the so-called Three Amigos Summit to discuss business between the three nations. Trudeau will also take part in the North American CEO Summit meeting with other business leaders. Eric Farnsworth, who leads the D.C. office of the Council of the Americas, says a continental vision is key to tackling the economic and foreign policy challenges of the post-pandemic world. TMX Group signed a deal to buy a 21% stake in U.S.-based Vetify Holdings. It is a privately owned data, analytics, and digital distribution company. The operator of the Toronto Stock Exchange says the deal is worth around $234 million. It officially closed on Monday. TMX says the investment includes an agreement that will accelerate its global index strategy and increase the depth of data-driven insights the company provides to clients. More than 1,000 striking CNH industrial workers in Iowa and Wisconsin have rejected the final offer from the maker of construction and agricultural equipment, extending their 8-month work stoppage. The United Auto Workers Union announced the vote by members who work for CNH in a statement over the weekend. It says the union's bargaining committee will meet to discuss next steps to take with the company. Workers previously rejected a proposal that included an 18.5% raise, fearing the hikes would not cover soaring inflation and health insurance costs. CNH Industrial, based in the United Kingdom, has more than 37,000 employees around the world. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 42 points on the day to finish at 19,857. The Dow was down 112 points to 33,517. The S&P 500 was down 2 points on the day to 3892, and the Nasdaq was up 66 points to 10,635. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 86 cents to 74.63 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 20 cents to 391 US. Gold was down 2 cents to 1871.80 US an ounce, and silver was down a cent to 23.64 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.11 per bushel, barley's at $9.65, canola's at $19.54, and corn is at $11.25 per bushel. Live cattle February contract was up 98 cents to $157.75. Feeder cattle January contract was up 93 cents to $183.63, and lean hogs February contract was up 53 cents to $80.80. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 74.69 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the Alberta government announced more financial help for families, seniors, and disabled Albertans. The province's $100 affordability payments will be given out this month. Officials say the payment should help provide relief to offset inflationary pressures. Officials say beginning January 18th, seniors 65 and older who are not receiving the Alberta Seniors Benefit and eligible parents with kids under the age of 18 can apply for a total of $600 in monthly payments. You know, there's a new ISIS threat to the Western world. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says it's coming out of both the Middle East and Africa. She'll share details with us in just a moment. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. Discover how Lethbridge has played an important military role in the preservation of world peace and security by visiting the Lethbridge Military Museum at the Vimy Ridge Armory at the Lethbridge Airport. The museum is open to the public each Wednesday from noon to 4 p.m. Special arrangements for other days and times can be made by calling 403-328-6196. Admission is free, but donations are gratefully accepted. For more information, visit lethbridgemilitarymuseum.org. Lethbridge Sport Council's Indoor Roving Gyms program takes place Tuesdays at Emmanuel Lutheran Church from 6 to 7 p.m. and Thursdays at the Service Sports Center from 10 to 11 a.m. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy an hour of fun and get active. Pre-registration is required and space is limited. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/roving gyms. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The U.S. Department of Defense said there's an emergence of a new breed of extremist militants coming from the terror group ISIS. Now, to talk about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, who joins us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, the Pentagon is basing this on dangerous conditions that have developed in both the Middle East and Africa, allowing the terror group to become a significant power.
Yes, well, when we take our eyes off of the target, of course, they're going to grow. take advantage of the political vulnerabilities in these areas in Africa and in the Middle East. Before ISIS was basically in Syria and Iraq. Now they have, of course, expanded their territory. And remember, ISIS is a one-off type of terror organization, meaning they never were a huge terror organization in terms of numbers, but their goal was always this do-it-yourself type of terrorism, meaning trying to find recruits in the United States, in Europe, all over the world, and to say if you take out one Western person, you automatically become a martyr. Whereas if you compare it to the Al Qaeda terror organization, they go for large scale terror surprises like 9/11, and we had reports last month on the foreign desk that Al Qaeda is back at it again, trying to reconvene and trying to plot attacks that are revolving around airplanes again. So these are where we have to stay ahead of the threats. If this threat is coming through the Pentagon, I assure you, Hal, it's too late, meaning they have already grown to a level where we need to now backtrack and figure out how to play defense instead of offense. Let's play offense and get rid of them before they even have the opportunity to sprout up in these areas. Let's not leave these political vacuums and these vulnerabilities to allow these terror organizations to grow and flourish.
Like how you talk about offense and defense, especially NFL playoffs about to get underway here. Lisa, there are some serious concerns in Congress that some of the U.S. humanitarian aid will actually make its way into the hands of terrorists. Can you explain?
Right. So the Biden administration is rolling back some of these boundaries that they have on humanitarian aid. And because these definitions, if you will, are more lax now, we're able to see different organizations and humanitarian groups give this aid to groups that do not deserve them, especially when it's American taxpayer money getting into the hands of, for example, terror organizations, groups that are maybe working together with the Taliban or the Iran regime are two examples of where it has landed, or the pay for slay program with the Palestinians. The Trump administration was very, very, very hawkish on letting that our American taxpayer money get into the hands of those sympathizers. But yet again, the Biden administration now rolling back these basically guidelines, allowing this money to get into the wrong hands. And that is why we are seeing some lawmakers sound the alarm on rolling back these safeguards that are currently in place.
Lisa, Prince Harry's new memoir is drawing the ire of many in Afghanistan following his claim that he killed 25 Taliban fighters while he was posted with the British forces in the country.
Yeah, I mean, talk about the guy who says he doesn't want to be in the limelight, and yet he's trying to get every headline he possibly can. I mean, who's had enough of Prince Harry already? I think all of us have. Yes, so comes out that he was basically fighting Taliban fighters. Now the Taliban has put basically a target on UK soldiers, saying they want to basically gain revenge for what Prince Harry is claiming in his book. Look, there's no such thing as bad publicity for Prince Harry and his wife going around. They have thrown everyone under the bus, including obviously their own family. These are the ways that they're becoming relevant, really being tabloidy, really being, reality television relevant, trying to get out there. And of course, I think a lot of people are just very turned off by their approach on all of this. And now we have the Taliban going after them and the UK. So they've turned this into a global conflict of some sort, but hopefully it will all go away very soon.
A woman from Alabama who allegedly joined ISIS at the age of 20 back in 2014 had a baby with one of its fighters in Syria and says she hopes to return to the United States, serve prison time if necessary, and advocate against the extremists. Lisa Hodamothana says she was simply brainwashed.
Obviously, she was brainwashed, but thank you, Hal, for bringing this full circle. We just talked about ISIS and how they try to recruit people from their basements, from their comfortable lives here in the United States. I mean, think about a human being who is able to be so brainwashed that they leave their lives, their normal, democratic, freedom-loving lives here in the West, whether it be in Canada, the United States, or Europe, and go off to fight for ISIS. They have an ISIS baby, and of course, then have buyer's remorse, and they realize how wonderful the West is and how they want to come back. And now she's willing to pay the time to do so. But, there has to be some sort of extreme vetting in these cases. Obviously, she should be brought to trial and brought to justice. But Are they really telling the truth, or will they only bring their entire network of terrorism here to the United States or to Canada or to Europe to only operate and have a base here? We have to be extremely careful. Obviously, she has buyer's remorse. Obviously, she was brainwashed. But again, I want to go back to my original point of starting, or kind of catching this before it starts. When we see so many threats, I remember back in 2014 when ISIS came onto the global stage, finding these kinds of recruitment posts on Telegram and WhatsApp and Facebook more than anything else, 2014, and bringing it to the attention of authorities at these companies, and a lot of times having it just fall by the wayside where these threats are not taken seriously. Of course, now we see where social media's head was at the time, and not really going after these terrorists. But again, let's catch them before they get so-called brainwashed, before they get recruited, before they go over to Syria and to Iraq and anywhere else that they are fighting for ISIS, alongside ISIS and with ISIS.
And you're right, absolutely, especially some of the refugees we're bringing in now. Vetting will be key, definitely. Lisa, Iranians across North America and Europe show their solidarity for Iran's protesters over the weekend, with large crowds that gathered here in Canada, where you are in the U.S., Germany and Sweden. The protests against the Islamic Republic have continued unabated for 4 months since 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was killed at the hands of the Iranian government and their morality police. Lisa, the revolution continues.
It does continue, and the people are so courageous to continue coming out when they see the executions happening. Imagine these young people that are being rounded up solely for their peaceful protesting, and then they are executed. We had 2 very prominent young men executed over the weekend, and the list of executions occurs. When we reported just a month or 2 ago about 15,000 of these young protesters being on death row and the potential for them to be executed, the mainstream media actually came out and said, no, this is a lie, it's not true. And then when you juxtapose that, when this is happening in real time, I mean, what will the world do? Will the global community stand back and wait for that death toll to hit 15,000 before they offer support to Iran's protesters? And to your point, of course, the expat community, the Iranian Americans, Canadians, Europeans, and those who support them were out on the streets this past weekend offering support and solidarity, marching side by side their Iranian compatriots and those who they support back in Iran, and trying to bring attention to government bodies to support this revolution. Impose proper sanctions, enforce those sanctions. It's not just, lip service. We want them enforced. Step away from any deals that will normalize relations with Iran's regime, and of course, to come out and support regime change. This regime being gone will only be better for the entire world community, national security, global security, and of course, the people of Iran who are asking for our help.
So how close are we to actually seeing Iran's regime potentially being overthrown?
The people are out on the streets. That's the main ingredient here. But we do need global support for this. They can't do it alone. Think about it, how they don't have weapons. They don't have any means of organization other than themselves. They're rolling up their sleeves and coming out onto the streets. But they do need the world communities. They do need the United States, the European powers, Canada, everyone to be on board and to enforce this policy. Until the Western world decides that they want to follow a policy of regime change, it's not going to happen alone. But the Iranian people are saying, if you're not going to help us, at the very least, don't stand in our way. Don't normalize relations with Iran's regime. Don't water down the sanctions. You have to help us out. And of course, again, it will only help everyone involved here if the world community decides to enforce these sanctions, to support regime change, and to get rid of the largest supporter of global terror.
Now, speaking of protests, Lisa, supporters of former Brazilian President Bolsonaro broke into buildings for Brazil's National Congress, the Supreme Federal Court, and the Planalto Palace. Now, some American politicians are comparing the incident over the weekend to the January 6th Capitol riot.
You can see why they would do that, right? It's easy to dismiss all of these protests as just right-wingers going crazy. This is obviously a very zealous group of supporters of Brazil's former leader. They believe that the last election was fraudulent, and that those who voted for this extremely left-wing called socialist new leader in Brazil bought out the votes of the lower socioeconomic brackets of society. I spoke to a few people in Brazil who say that it is very lopsided, that many people in the country are very much upset about the new leader, and then that's why they're out on the streets. They're trying to make their voices heard. They want a recount. They want things to be fair, and they want a fair election. And we can obviously compare that to what was going on here in the United States as well. So a lot of protests going on in the world, a lot of stories to pay attention to, particularly in terms of this kind of left-wing socialist takeover. You can listen to a lot of people that come from socialist countries like Cuba, like Venezuela. I know how you traveled to Cuba. You talked a bit about what you saw there. Talk to them. Obviously they are not happy with the way that things are. They talk about how a society will deteriorate, how an economy will deteriorate with socialist policies. And of course, that is what is triggering a lot of these protesters that are out on the streets.
Absolutely. When I talked to some of the locals in Veradero, Cuba, they were telling me about how a lot of the best food and milk doesn't go to the locals, but it always goes to the resorts for the tourists, right? And how they feel so suppressed there. And it's definitely a different world, Lisa. Now, Beijing opened its borders as travelers streamed into China by air and sea over the weekend, many eager for long-awaited reunion since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this followed historic protests against a policy that included frequent testing, curbing movement, and massive lockdowns that heavily damaged the world's second biggest economy.
Right. So yes, it was tremendous levels of repression there for COVID. But when people came out onto the streets, the power of the people, not only were they calling for an end to these COVID policies, but they were also calling for an end to their government. They're calling for the overthrow of Xi Jinping's regime, and that is what perhaps triggered this kind of stepping back and loosening of a lot of these policies, allowing people to travel. Imagine being so tied down and being quarantined for such a long time. They're not even allowing this immunity to happen. So I think we're going to see many more cases. Obviously, we're going to see many more deaths, and a lot of these global health organizations, including the WHO, have said that China is suppressing the numbers, is not allowing us to know exactly what's going on. But the morgues don't have any space. Cemeteries are booked because of the number of COVID deaths that they're experiencing right now. And of course, opening up, they're of course going to see more deaths, but eventually they're going to see that immunity come into play as well.
As the pandemic slowly wraps up, what are we seeing in your neck of the woods in Southern California right now when it comes to masking up and the promotion of more booster shots, perhaps, with the COVID-19 vaccine?
It's a mixed bag. I'm seeing a lot more people wearing masks right now, but that's also because RSV and the flu are very, very deadly this season. And the COVID numbers are up as well. So of course it's winter, it's flu time. We have to live with COVID, right? So in the same breath that we say the flu and RSV this year, we're going to also say COVID every year. So this is something that will just come with the seasons, will come with cold season and all of that. But we're seeing a lot more masking because of that, especially in elderly populations and more sensitive populations. It's mixed here in Southern California because you have a certain segment of the population that is so tied to the concept of boosters and more vaccines and more vaccines and more vaccines, and they're getting their children vaccinated despite the stories about these children athletes and other children where many children are getting COVID and are okay, meaning that is better to build up that immunity naturally than get the vaccine. But again, I'm not a health official by any means. I'm telling you what I'm observing is that in many segments of the population here, you're still seeing a very, very passionate and zealous group of people still pushing for the boosters. I was invited to a TV screening at one of the Hollywood studios here, and they required not just the vaccinations, the initial 2, they required boosters as well. So it's interesting to see that as a requirement to enter an indoor space, while there's many other studies coming out that are kind of going against that. So mixed bag. I think it's like that everywhere. I know here, obviously, the population is more left and very much in tune with what's going on at the Biden White House and Fauci and all of that. So there you have it. But of course, immunity is doing its job. Nature is doing its job. And of course, a lot of people already having had COVID feel much more comfortable letting their guard down and letting nature do its work.
By the way, before we let you go, Lisa, it was on this day that Apple CEO Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone to the world in San Francisco, and we've seen a lot of versions since then. Do you have an iPhone yourself?
I do. I've had many iPhones. I was one of the last originally to let go of my iPhone because I just love that BlackBerry and being able to type very quickly on it. And I remember getting the iPhone and thinking, I'm making a lot of mistakes on this. It's very the autocorrect, typing on it. But of course, with all the applications and how it makes everything so much easier, I've become fully an Apple person, and every device I have is pretty much Apple.
U.S. correspondent, iPhone lover, and foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for joining us today from LA.
My pleasure. Thank you.
There is much research that takes place in universities across Canada. The University of Lethbridge is no different. It recently earned national recognition for research on how gut inflammation drives changes in brain structure. Turns out there's a huge connection between our gut and the functioning of our other systems in the body. So today we are speaking with Dr. Chelsea Mattis, who did her postdoc research on the subject. She recently received a L'Oreal Canada for Women in Science Research Excellence Fellowship and one of 3 Royal Society of Canada Alice Wilson Awards. Dr. Mattis, she joins me now. Welcome to Bridge City News. And first of all, congratulations on your work being recognized.
Yes, thank you. It's, science is kind of a slow process. You plant seeds and it's years before you see results. So it's just one of those harvest seasons, it feels like.
How long have you been working on this?
So I've been working on this particular question since about 2017.
Okay.
So
it's been about 5 years.
4 or 5 years.
Okay, so this recognition obviously validates how important the research is and how widespread and debilitating gut inflammation can be for people. So some of us, may not always see that connection between the gut and the brain. So maybe tell us, how does chronic gut inflammation drive changes in brain structure? How does that all work?
Well, we are all familiar with what happens when you get sick. So imagine you have a bout of food poisoning or just some stomach upset, a gastrointestinal bug of some kind. We all know what that feels like. You feel these classic sickness behaviors. You feel fatigue, lethargy. You don't enjoy your hobbies. You kind of just want to, recoil and go in a corner, and maybe you're a little bit more irritable to the people that you live with. But as the inflammation in your gut subsides, so do those sickness behaviors. But if you have chronic gut inflammation, that is a different situation because it becomes something that your body needs to adapt to. You then still need to go out and get food and take care of your children. And so in some ways, the body is just adapting to this new normal, this chronic gut inflammation. And as a consequence, your brain has different changes to kind of accommodate for that. And this can be driven through immune mechanisms or neural mechanisms or hormonal mechanisms.
Okay, so what is it actually doing to the brain then?
So there's quite a number of things happening when you have chronic inflammation. One of the things that we see is it's highly comorbid with depression and anxiety. And so this almost seems like sickness behaviors in the long term kind of morph into this depression, anxiety. And as a consequence, certain structures in your brain that are involved in assessing threats and how you cope with stress in your life, those parts of the brain become changed. And this is what we see, people that have chronic gut issues, or really any kind of chronic inflammation disease, what they will find is that, maybe they'll be in a period of remission where things seem to be okay, but then something will happen in their life, like a bad breakup, or perhaps, they lost their job, or a pet dies. Those stresses are enough to actually drive a flare, a remission, or a flare up of disease again. And so in this way, it changes the way your brain structure is, but also then how you perceive and respond to things in the environment. And that can also have then impacts on the disease itself.
Oh, that's fascinating. So can the condition of one's mind be based on how healthy their gut is? Is it kind of like symbiotic like that almost?
Absolutely. And that's a great question. People are always wondering, well, what can I do to kind of improve, the situation I have? So we have, there's medicines that people take that affect their gut inflammation, but also brain inflammation. And so those are often antidepressants or anti-anxiety medicines. But other things like cognitive behavioral therapy can be a way that people can sort of change the way that you perceive the environment to kind of help reduce amounts of stress. Other things like anything that can activate this beautiful nerve called the vagus nerve can actually drive this anti-inflammatory pathway. And you can activate this through meditation, through deep breathing exercises, through yoga, singing. So there's lots of kind of different ways that you can sort of control from more of like a top-down way to kind of help manage.
Wow. Yeah, that doesn't sound like modern medicine at all. It almost sounds like a jump in philosophy from Western medicine to Eastern medicine. Do you see it that way at all?
Certainly, there's a lot of value to the kinds of medicine that are practiced, not traditional medicine. Of course, I would always say that the most important thing is to see a professional doctor to manage the symptoms of disease, because that's really important. But I think increasingly people are recognizing that, the anxiety and the depression that is comorbid with lots of chronic diseases, it's not because you have the disease. You're not anxious and depressed because you have the disease. That's part of it, but it's also a very important component of the disease. The disease also involves these sort of behavioral changes to kind of adapt to this new normal. And in many ways, then treating the way that the anxiety and depression is an important component of treating the disease holistically. So certainly, like we all know, diet and exercise and good sleep, these are really important things to help, with brain and body to help good function. But then there's these other little things that can be really helpful too, that maybe are more overlooked. But certainly, I wouldn't say that singing is a good thing to do instead of taking medicine.
Yeah, I can see how it would make you feel better though, especially if you're a good singer. Even if you're a bad singer, right? we all like to sing in the shower. So does this also mean that maybe gut health could affect other brain functions like learning or memory or other things like that?
Yes, no, absolutely. People that have chronic gut inflammation will often experience not only anxiety and depression, but also cognitive dysfunction. So this is kind of like working memory or focusing on certain things, attention. So people that have chronic illnesses often will attend to the things that they experience. So for example, they might attend more to things related to gut health or things that remind them of pain or the anticipation of pain. So they might attend more to that. And so it does become kind of a bit of a reworking in that sense too. But certainly cognitive dysfunction, then this sort of brain fog that we hear about in terms of long COVID, it's a very real thing, and it's a part of the disease, of the immune response.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. Could there also be a connection between gut health and, let's say, Alzheimer's disease, or is that completely different?
No, absolutely not. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that gut health impacts brain health and mental health in many different kind of disease states. So, for example, people that have Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease or dementia, studies have looked at the communities of microbiota in their gut. So these are the bacteria, the fungi, the viruses that live in your gut all the time. But people that have chronic diseases, including Alzheimer's, they will notice the community of their gut will actually be shifted. It'll be less diverse. It might have certain sort of bugs in it that aren't really associated with healthy outcomes. And so we do see that it all is connected. The things that are in your gut, they can secrete things that directly act on neurons that go into the bloodstream and directly impact and are able to access the brain. And so we do know that, the microbiome is sort of like this living organ inside of us, producing things, responding to stress and diet and sleep. And so this also, is a huge part of sort of the holistic, look at a particular disease.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because that term gut health It's so thrown away. It's thrown around these days. It's kind of almost like a catchphrase. But when you get right down to the basics, what does it actually mean by having good gut health? Like we hear about the bad bacteria and whatnot. So, I mean, does it really just come down to a person's diet?
So this is a great question, and this is a question that researchers are asking, like, what is a healthy gut microbiome? And it's different for different people. A lot of it is genetic and sort of based on sort of what is around you. You know, was it a vaginal birth? Was it a cesarean section? What kind of foods were you exposed to as a child? Did you have a pet in the house? Are you an only child or do you have a huge family? These things all make a difference. But of course, also the things that you eat and how you're exposed to things in your environment, that all makes a big difference as well. But what we do know is that there seems to be a core microbiome for people that once they sort of have reached a certain age, like maybe 3 or 4, it kind of stabilizes to some extent, but it does still shift. And we know that a healthy microbiome seems to be associated with increased diversity. So people that have good health in older age will have a more diverse microbiome than people that may be suffering from different kinds of diseases, whether it's Alzheimer's or ulcerative colitis or diabetes. And so a diverse microbiome seems to be associated with health. And the best way to get a diverse microbiome is to eat a diverse diet, rich in different things. In particular, things that are like probiotics, like that have bacteria in them, like yogurts, things like that are fermented foods like kimchi or sauerkraut or kombucha, and then just lots and lots of fiber. Because plant fibers are very important because they don't get digested in your small intestine, so they go to your large intestine or your colon, and suddenly all those really important gut bacteria have food to eat. So if you're not eating a diet rich in fibers, then you're kind of starving out really important players in your gut microbiome that are important for your health.
Wow, that is fascinating. So if somebody has chronic inflammation in the gut, what would you advise them to do? Is it mostly diet related or could there be some other underlying problem there?
Well, I would always recommend, of course, people talk to their physicians and also get a referral to a specialist if you're dealing with gut specific problems. But I would also say it's important to, start looking at the diet, starting a diet journal and getting a sense of, are there certain foods that might trigger discomfort? People frequently find that lactose or gluten, suddenly they have, sensitivities to that they weren't aware of before. But also, yes, I would say, a healthy diet is going to help anything. So, again, like a diet that's really rich in diversity, if you can try and incorporate fermented foods and lots of fibers and probiotics. So, I mean, it's an important component of health, but it's also important to start maybe paying a bit more attention to what's going in as well. So, that food diary, I think, is something that most physicians would sort of recommend people would struggle.
Yeah, I understand that your work has therapeutic potential as well. So what are you finding that may help remediate chronic inflammation-induced changes in the brain?
So we're looking at a number of different things. My research program is kind of looking more from like top down. We're not looking at attenuating or suppressing gut inflammation, but rather we're looking at, okay, what's happening in the brain? And if we change things in the brain, might that change things in the gut too? And one of the things that we're looking at is psilocybin. And so this is a really exciting drug because it has been shown to have really, potential for people that have drug-resistant depression. And so people that have, chronic gut illnesses and have this comorbid anxiety and depression, a different kind of drug might be really helpful for them. So we're looking at psilocybin, and I'm also looking at how certain cannabinoids might be helpful as well, like CBD. There's a whole bunch of other ones, CBG, CBDV. And so we're looking at sort of, non-traditional kinds of medicines to see how that might impact the brain.
So it's still in the research phase now, or should people be running to the cannabis store to pick up these CBDs?
So I work with mice. I work with mouse models, and we're really good at curing diseases in mice. Of course, translating that to people is a little bit more difficult. But we're looking at the mechanisms to understand how these things might be helpful and how different groups of people that have diseases might be helped by certain things more than others. So there's a whole, subpopulations within a group of sick people that might find treatments that work for them that might not work for other people.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, people are finding success with certain kinds of cannabinoids in attenuating certain kinds of pain, or I'd say it's more related to pain than it is to inflammation. But it's a very case by case basis, and I would be hesitant to recommend anyone do anything without the advice of their doctor.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Do you think that as a result of your research that there could be other methods to treat mental health issues in the future? Where could this lead?
Absolutely. I think that by understanding how chronic inflammation changes the brain, because one of the problems is when you have chronic diseases and then you're in a period of remission and you're trying to stay in that remission, well, your brain structure has been changed fundamentally in certain ways. And then how can you kind of revert that back to, something that will improve your quality of life? Sure, it might be adaptive to have those changes in the brain, but evolution always doesn't really care about your quality of life. We want people to be happy and have healthy lives. And so some of these drugs that we're looking at are maybe more targeting sort of inflammation-induced anxiety and depression, which is a different kind of depression than someone who maybe is a certain genetic predisposition to these sorts of things, or maybe experienced, trauma in early life that would lead to sort of depression and anxiety. So we're looking at a kind of a different perspective, like a different type of anxiety and depression in people. But I think that looking at the different kinds of drugs that might be available, and not necessarily the anti-inflammatory drugs that were traditionally looked at for, suppressing inflammation in the brain. I think by looking at some of these drugs that have been traditionally maligned and pushed aside as sort of psychedelics, and they're recreational and there's no value to them medicinally, I think increasingly researchers are understanding that's not the case. We really need access to these drugs so we can test them and try them and help people.
Yeah, it is absolutely fascinating stuff. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but Dr. Chelsea Mattis, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate having you on. And once again, congratulations on being recognized nationally. That's a huge feat for you.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Chelsea Mattis is a researcher at the University of Lethbridge who was recently recognized nationally for her findings on the gut-brain health connection. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.